Hello, everybody. It's Aaron Christensen with Horror 101 with Dr. AC. Thank you for coming on and visiting the show. Today, we're going to be talking about this new, well, it's not new anymore, but it's new to us, Weird Wisconsin, the Bill Rebane Collection from Arrow Video. And joining me today is going to be my pal who's from Wisconsin, an authentic Wisconsinite, Dave Kosanke, author and editor of Liquid Cheese Fanzine. Go ahead and unmute, and we are ready to roll. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here.
How's the weather up there?
Cold.
Which is fitting because a lot of our subjects' films are in the winter wilds of Wisconsin. What was your first experience with Bill Rebane as a filmmaker?
I didn't know of any filmmakers from the state of Wisconsin until Mystery Science Theater 3000 had Giant Spider Invasion on their show. And then that's kind of when I first heard about Bill Rebane. Prior to that, I knew nothing about him. It was just one of those names that meant nothing to me. But when I saw that film, being a fan of anything to do with spiders, especially giant ones, I was immediately like, just blown away by how fun and everything it was. But the added, pleasure of that was knowing that it was filmed here in, my home state. So then it was just a matter of finding his other films. But back then it was like really hard to find the films, let alone information about them. There really wasn't any write-ups in the magazines or the books I was reading at the time that even mentioned him. So it was all like just stuff I didn't know anything about. So it was just interesting to start to dive in and try to find whatever information I could.
Well, had you seen Giant Spider Invasion prior to MST3K?
No, that was my first experience.
Okay. Because I saw it in the theater as a double feature with Godzilla versus Megalon. And I want to say it must have been like, around like 1977, something like that. And it was in a hardtop. I remember it wasn't just a drive-in. Like I saw it in the theater as part of that double feature. And I remember just thinking, wow, what an amazing movie. You got geodes and you got spiders cracking at them. One of my, seminal films was Tarantula. So this was kind of like, here's a throwback to one of my favorite movies. And it's funny watching it as a kid versus watching it as an adult. Like you don't notice all the like weird, like kind of like off kilter things about it as a kid. You're just kind of like taking it at face value. But as an adult, when you're watching, you're like, these characters are weird. And what's the skipper from Gilligan's Island doing in this movie?
Right.
But I had a great time. But I didn't know, I think at that young age, I never thought about like who the director was. And right. I had not heard of any other Bill Rebane movies. I want to say it was our mutual friend, John Kitley, who kind of said, oh yeah, well, he also did, this Invasion from Inner Earth movie. And there's, this Alpha Incident movie. And I'm like, okay. And those movies turn up on like those 50 pack Mill Creek, public domain. And so that's kind of how I came across those when I was kind of like going through my library and going, oh, wait, I actually do have some Bill Rebane movies and I'll watch them. And they don't all measure up to the popcorn fun that is Giant Spider Invasion. But I think that kind of leads us to the discussion because, Arrow Video chose to put out this box set about Bill Rebane. What do you think is the appeal about your local hero?
Well, the fact that he got so many films done.
Right.
He didn't just make one or two. He made like several and he kept going. Not only that, but the fact that he had his own studio in Gleason, Wisconsin, where he was basically, I want to not quite literally a one-man show, but pretty much where he was like in charge of whatever, production design, editing, cinematographer, you name it, script, he basically did it all. And then back in the 70s, when he first started, that there wasn't that really wasn't a big market, obviously. If you weren't in, say, California or New York, what chances did you have to get your stuff out there to the public? But he managed to do it. And I think that goes a long way towards, having some recognition and giving the guy, his just due, because he was doing it and did it for a while and did it in Wisconsin. So more power to him.
Kind of kinship to Romero,
Absolutely.
in Pittsburgh, like the fact that, Romero like chose to make his movies in Pittsburgh, in his home state. And Rebane did the same. Rebane actually, he came here from Latvia and then he was in Chicago, went out to LA, and then came back to Wisconsin and decided this is where he wanted to set up camp.
Right.
And that was where he made his first movies. The first movie, and we'll kind of go through the films that are on the set. His first movie is called Monster A Go-Go. It was originally Terror at Half Day when he was shooting it. And he kept like kind of running out of money, and the project kind of like remained unresolved. And finally, Herschel Gordon Lewis approached him and said, "Hey, I need a second feature for my movie so that I can send them out as a double bill." And he bought the film Rebane and shot some additional footage and kind of repackaged it as Monster A Go-Go and put it out. And it's kind of a Quatermass experiment in that you have an astronaut who returns from a space voyage, and they cast an actor named Henry Height, who was, like something like, 17 feet tall. He was just a huge guy. And they covered him with like some spots and stuff like that. And he's like the monster who kind of doesn't do a whole lot but kind of like walk around through the movie. But that kind of sums up like what the movie is. There's not a lot of drama to it. And it's a lot of kind of like, just kind of black and white footage of people sitting around in rooms and talking about this menace. And then occasionally you see the menace. When was the last time you saw this one?
Probably like 20 some years ago. I want to say it was probably on a Something Weird video release.
Right. Yeah.
That's why I was first exposed to it. But it was more H.G. Lewis's name was attached to it. That was more the key. It wasn't so much Bill Rebane. It was a Lewis film. So that was the initial interest in it.
Right. And then he had a few other projects, but nothing really got off the ground until he went back to Gleason and, started up the shooting ranch. And that was his first, kind of solo effort was Invasion from Inner Earth. And that's another kind of like menace from space. Although in this case, it's kind of like a weird bacteria. And it's not the invasion, as the title would say, it's not from outer space, although there is a flying saucer. And you're led to believe that maybe the saucer came from Inner Earth, or at least one of the characters postulates that. But a lot of this movie is just characters either holed up in a cabin, kind of cut off, and they hear that, like the end of the world is happening everywhere else, or they're wandering out through the snow and wandering from place to place. This is one that I think is kind of a mysterious, in that you go, how did this movie get made, and why did this movie get, any kind of recognition at all? And yet this film, actually ended up pairing with, it was the Alpha ended up pairing with Star Wars, but this one got some play. Invasion from Inner Earth. And then the next year, he made Giant Spider Invasion, 1975. Right. And that's kind of like his biggest film. That was the one that, it played, huge at the drive-in circuit. Unfortunately, Bill Rebane didn't see a lot of the returns from it. Apparently he says that the distributors pretty much took everything.
Yeah, and that kind of also tied in with the home video releases of that.
Right.
It was one of those, you call it like a gray market release, where there really wasn't a rights holder to it. So anyone who had a print of it or whatever was just throwing it out on disc. So that was, because when I met him, the first time I met Bill Rebane was at the Bill Rebane Movie Festival in Madison, Wisconsin in 2005. And I actually had a copy of Giant Spider Invasion on DVD that I brought for him to sign, but he's like, well, this isn't authorized. I think it was Fredo and Ray, his Retro Media company, had put it out. But Rebane was not happy about that because he's like, this is, I didn't authorize it, whatever. But that was the problem with that film. It just had a spotty distribution.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, he had his biggest hit, and he didn't make it's, I mean, again, similar to Romero, you got, that little copyright thing for Night of the Living Dead is what sent it out onto, Midnight Movie, slots for every television station, but that's kind of what helped bring him to the public notice.
Right.
Allowed him to have his fans. So in that regard, but the next, then Alpha Incident came out in 1978, and this is a strange little film. The idea is that it's very much similar to the Andromeda Strain, in that you have a man-made created virus that is being transported, and then it gets released somehow. And then you focus on the characters who are kind of quarantined. And on several of the special features, they talk about how Alpha Incident has a greater resonance now in a post-COVID age than it may have when it was out on its own. When, the idea of like being quarantined and cut off from the rest of the world wasn't really something people thought about.
Yeah, I totally agree, because watching it now, it puts that into perspective about, with COVID and everything like that. So there is an added element that I think fans who would throw this in maybe for the first time would go, hey, this is kind of like relevant to what we've just gone through,
Right.
So maybe just by happenstance or, whatever, that film takes on a different, thing now. However, one of the interesting parallels that has, going back what we were talking about earlier with regional filmmakers in Romero and Pittsburgh, is you can kind of say the Crazies. I mean, it has a sort of similar vibe in that, but that's about where it ends. Like I wouldn't want to compare the two films, because if you go down that route, they're miles apart.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, the ending is similar as well, and that and actually it also harkens back to Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually make the claim that it's a blatant ripoff.
Yeah,
it's a blatant ripoff. And I mean, the ending is like completely ripped off, but nonetheless.
And Alpha Incident stars Ralph Meeker. Well, actually, I say stars Ralph Meeker, but Ralph Meeker is probably the big name. But Ralph Meeker, some people probably know him from Few of the Gods. He plays the kind of the greedy businessman who's looking to market it. But apparently he just suffered from a stroke. And so he's very sedate, which is not what we usually associate with Ralph Meeker performances. But it's kind of interesting to see him, this person who clearly knows how to perform, who is a professional, and yet he's kind of sinking into the background while the local talent is taking up most of the space.
Yeah, it's almost like he's just used for name value.
Right.
Because you can totally see like he just wasn't whatever. I mean, it was like you said, recovering from the stroke, and I'm sure that had a lot to do with the fact that he didn't have a lot of lines of dialogue, and even when he does speak, his character's actions are like kind of blah.
Yeah.
Like they would ask him questions about, what he does and things like, and he just has real like nonchalant, like uninteresting, responses. So it's kind of like, it is unfortunate that, he was just almost like a prop, more or less.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was the money or the name to get it made.
Right.
And also George Buck Flower has one of his best roles in this as the railroad employee.
That's actually, for me personally, that's the name. Like if you're going down exploitation, like cult movie routes, George Buck Flower is like in the upper echelon. When you look at his resume, especially the early 70s, he was in like almost every other sexploitation film. Something Weird Video would release all these double features, and I swear Buck Flower would pop up in at least one of them. He was always there.
Now, what's funny, what you said earlier about Ralph Meeker, like his lines of dialogue not really, furthering the story or bringing up anything interesting. That seems to be kind of a hallmark of Bill Rebane films, is that the characters talk a lot, but they don't necessarily say a lot.
Yeah.
It doesn't really, it doesn't propel things.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, there's a lot of potential there in the story when they talk about things that are going on. Like, well, we're at this railroad and we're transporting this to Colorado. So we're going to take it to Denver, and the high altitude may have, something to do with this the diseased organism, that they're carrying. I mean, there's a lot of things there, but a lot of it is just kind of like they don't really. The characters seem more interested in like talking about Playboy magazines, and all this like stuff that really, I don't know. And then they throw out the other thing where, well, now we realize we have to stay awake because if we fall asleep, granted, this is a few years before Wes Craven came out with Nightmare on Elm Street. So
well, but it is a few years after Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So
yeah, of course. Right. Of course. Right. Exactly.
And what's funny is like, yeah, I mean, if you fall asleep, basically your brain explodes out of your head. But it's funny. I have to keep referring back to Night of the Living Dead because, you've got all these characters, and in the farmhouse in Night of the Living Dead, there is so much tension going on there. And like they are struggling to keep, the outside menace outside. And yet here, we've got a similar scenario, but there's no outside menace. And so it's just kind of just this circling and circling and circling. And even the characters, there's not enough drama. Everything's kind of like very low key. It's almost like, well, they don't want to aggravate each other because we know we're going to have to be here a while. But that kind of that Midwestern politeness.
Right.
I feel like that's kind of what's lying there, is that like there's that simmering underneath it. But everybody's so polite that they never actually get into it with each other.
No, I agree. I mean, there's that. It's lacking. And like you said, there's no menace. I mean, we don't technically know what this thing does until almost like the very end.
Right. Exactly.
So it's basically like hearsay. Like there's communication from, the so-called government, and they're saying, well, this is the thing, but without actually experience it, how do we know that they're even telling the truth? Because, they're just kind of like winging it. And as the audience, you're waiting for something to happen. Like, well, is this true? Or is this made up? Are they stringing him along? We don't really know until maybe like the last 10 or 15 minutes.
Right. Yeah. And our scientists who are explaining things, they aren't really even explaining things. They're like, oh man, we just can't figure this out. I can't. It's like, you're not helping. I could have told you that we weren't figuring it out.
Right.
The next film on the box set is Demons of Ludlow, but between that we had The Capture of Bigfoot. And you've seen that, right?
That one I have not yet.
Oh, that's really fun. I highly recommend it because it's a genuine monster movie, and it's kind of like it and Giant Spider Invasion. I feel like Rebane is like hitting on, if not 4 cylinders, at least 3. And like there's genuine action, and you got pretty good, monster suit. You got 2 monster suits. You got a big Bigfoot, and a little Bigfoot. But definitely worth checking out. But then we go to Demons of Ludlow, which feels kind of akin to John Carpenter's The Fog, in that we have, kind of like a small town that's celebrating a bicentennial, and there's some weird, weird goings on from the past that have come to, the sins of the fathers are being visited upon the children. You just recently watched this one. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, it had an interesting concept. I mean, again, it's something that has been used in films before. But I think the execution here is leaves a little bit to be desired when you kind of see the demons who are more or less pilgrims with a lot of like pancake face makeup, and it's like some of the stuff that they do is you're kind of shaking your head going like, well, this isn't really demonic. It's more like silly, but the execution of some of the scenes and the lighting, some of the stuff in there has a definite European vibe, at least, from my perspective. So at least visually, there's a lot of interesting things going on. But some of the execution, the horror elements of it are just like, I'm shaking my head going like, what did I just watch?
Well, and I think that's it. Like, I mean, Bill Rebane's, like you kind of said, like he has interesting story ideas, but the execution of them feels, and I don't even know. I mean, like he was a big movie fan, so clearly he knew like what a script looked like and how, you go A to B to C to D, but he doesn't choose to do that. He chooses to kind of meander and to have like kind of like strange B-roll inserts that you're like, well, okay, how is that really, how does that feed the story? In some ways, it feels like he's trying to pad out a movie so it's up to feature length. With Demons of Ludlow, you've got a lot of characters who ask questions about the haunted piano, but nobody has any answers about the haunted piano until you get like halfway through the movie and you're like, okay, wait, that's the big mystery? Was like, that's it?
Right. And the other interesting thing when I was trying to pinpoint this instrument, everybody calls it a piano.
Right.
One character does call it our harmonium. And I looked that up because I didn't know what a harmonium was. But when they first show the piano and they're playing it, the music that you hear, I'm like, that does not sound like a piano.
Right.
And then when I looked up a harmonium, that's more like an organ, which would kind of go a little bit towards explaining what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was just a synthesizer.
Well, it sounds kind of like a harpsichord type of.
Yeah, but that's more in line with a harmonium. And then when you look at the images of a harmonium, I think that's more or less what it is.
Okay.
But and like I said, I think it's mentioned one time in the film where it's a harmonium. Otherwise, everyone else calls it a piano. So there's confusion there right from the start. Well, what exactly is this instrument?
Right. I agree. And again, I think that there's, as with a lot of Rebane's films, I feel like if you cut out a lot of the padding, you'd have, you'd have a pretty solid story. There's a part of me, wants to live in an alternate universe where somebody edits down all of Rebane's films into a short film and then puts them all together as an anthology.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of like you could go back to like Alpha Incident. I've heard a lot of people describe it as sort of like an Outer Limits type of thing.
Sure.
The vibe there. But again, Outer Limits minus commercials about 54 minutes, and that's probably about a better running time for that film. You chop about 30 minutes out of it. So editing, I agree with you. Editing is definitely an issue with some of his stuff.
Well, and he is the editor on it, so there you go.
That's true. Right. There are a couple key scenes though in Demons of Ludlow that I'd like to point out.
Yeah, sure.
The first one was with the little girl Emily, where she's playing with her dolls.
Yes.
That scene in and of itself is actually pretty well done when she's going through the dolls and she's saying, well, one of you laughed at me. Which one was it?
Right.
I thought that scene was executed well. And then when she goes in and sees the group of pilgrims, and then they come at her, they're saying, oh, a child with a child, because she's holding one of her dolls.
Right.
And then they go up to her and rip her top off.
Yeah.
So there's nudity. I'm like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be like a little girl. I'm like, what's going on here?
Well, and the thing is with that character is that she's clearly, got some kind of disability.
Like, exactly.
And she's right. She's a victim, of just like life.
Right. Right.
And you're like, oh, and that's your object of exploitation.
Right. It's unbelievable. It's granted that could be in a twisted sort of way. That's a selling point in and of itself.
Sure.
If you're looking for, trash movie fanatics, that in and of itself would be like, oh, I got to see that just to see that. But
right.
And then
yours.
The other point, being from Wisconsin, when I watch Rebane's stuff, especially now, is I'm looking for something that pinpoints it to the state. Like in this one, I think they're saying Ludlow is not Wisconsin. I'm assuming it's like Massachusetts because
like a New England,
a New England with the Pilgrims. I mean, I get that, but the one scene, and maybe most people not from the state would never pick up on this, but there's a lot of scenes where people have food on a table. One scene in particular, I noticed a plate of hot rolls and a plate of ham. That is a singular thing in Wisconsin. On a Sunday, after church, you buy hot rolls and ham. And that, sure enough, I'm guaranteeing that's exactly what happened. It was shot on a Sunday. They just got out of church because the lead character is also, a pastor. So there it is. There's a plate of food on the table, hot rolls and ham. But your average viewer would think nothing of that.
Nope.
That's total Wisconsin.
Did not even occur to me. Now, right. You were referring to the 2000 film or the 2005 film festival. What was that like?
That was interesting because, granted, there wasn't a lot of people there. It was maybe like 100 people there, but it mainly was because the Mystery Science Theater guys were there. Mike Nelson and Kevin Murphy. who voiced Tom Servo. And I think that was the draw, because I mean, I remember some of the people there were like, well, we don't know who Bill Rebane is, but we know Mystery Science Theater. So it was more about that than versus the true fans of Rebane.
Right.
Me, my friend John Kelly and Eric Ott, we were probably like the only three people there that were like fans of Rebane, so to say. But it was still cool just to experience that, in the nation's, not the nation's, the state capital of Madison. So the Orpheum Theater, I mean, it was a nice theater. So, I mean, they definitely kind of gave him the red carpet treatment. Nice. So it was kind of cool. It was a 2-day event. We'd only made it the one day, but we got to see Blood Harvest and Giant Spider Invasion. And something that his wife had put together called Wisconsin Movie Scrapbook, which was like a documentary on a lot of his stuff, just edited together with like trailers and clips and newscasts and stuff that was just cobbled together from whatever source. Totally homegrown, and it totally fit in with the whole vibe. And I've never heard anything else about that documentary getting released or shown anywhere. Doing a search on the internet comes up with nothing. So
yeah, you would think if it existed, it would also show up on this box set.
Exactly.
It is
right.
It is not to be found. I do want to mention, just because we're talking about like events where Rebane was there, like you and I were up in Merrill, Wisconsin, as part of their historical society. They have a whole like exhibit dedicated to Bill Rebane, and each one of his films has like this massive like display of all the poster art, and it has like the metal cage from the Giant Spider Invasion, the eating spider, and that absolutely gave me a different appreciation for Rebane, because like here's this guy who really cobbled together this stuff. I mean, he made, like you said, he made these movies, and he didn't just make one or two. I mean, he made like feature film after feature film after feature film with his own money, with investors, and doing it all, and him being the guy who directed and produced and edited and shot it. And it's kind of like, there's something exciting and to be celebrated about that, even if it isn't the best movie. Like if the end result isn't what we come to think of as, quote, good.
No, I agree. It's for me, obviously it's the regional aspect, the fact that it's done in Wisconsin, and I can relate when I see things, the railroad, the scenery, everything is there. It's just perfectly encapsulates the state, and that's what I like about it. And there's definitely a lot of weird oddball angles that his films had that your average fan who likes weird psychotronic stuff is definitely going to want to like check it out if they haven't seen any of his films before. There's definitely enough there to get anyone entertained. Although I gotta say, if I would have seen that as if I would have seen the Alpha incident as a double feature with Star Wars, if that would have been the first, which I'm assuming it was, I would have been asleep within 5 minutes.
You're like, nope.
I don't know who thought that was a great double feature, but nonetheless, the fact that it exists is great. So,
you mentioned off camera Stephen Thrower's Nightmare USA, and
exactly.
kind of referring to those regional filmmakers, because he highlights several of Rebane's films in that book.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really makes movie fans that much more exciting when they can kind of tie that in to their own state, or even just a fan like me. If I enjoy like stuff shot in New York City, there's a lot of filmmakers that have that, there. So I think Stephen Thrower really brought that to light to kind of get people to say, hey, maybe there's something in my state, to look for. So,
and I think, I mean, it's kind of like when you see a film that's been made by like a friend of yours, like you're kind of rooting for that film.
Absolutely.
And I think when you get down, you kind of like find out, like the stories behind the film, when you hear like the struggles they had to go through, it allows you to have a little deeper appreciation for the film itself. Even if you watched it at face value, you're kind of like, meh, like understanding like, oh, and having, like I've seen several of Rebane's films this week now. And it's like you start to kind of like see there's a thread going through these, that there's things that keep coming around and keep coming around. You're like, okay, I feel like I understand you a little better, Bill Rebane. and I understand the art, the artist and the art a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's true, I believe, of just about any independent filmmaker. Anyone removed from the studio system, anyone removed from Hollywood, they have to fight that little bit harder, a little bit better to get whatever it is that's going to get out there to set their stuff apart from the stuff that, is going to make billions and billions of dollars.
Right. I mean, this is definitely kind of like you were talking about with the rolls and the ham. I mean, this is a very distinct flavor. This is not going to appeal to everybody. But I think, once you kind of get into it, you're like, okay, I got to try a little bit more. I got to try a little bit more and see. I think part of it is just kind of like trying to understand it. Like, what is this? How does somebody think this is the movie that they want to put out in front of people?
Yep, absolutely.
One of the discs has his kind of non-horror efforts. The Game, which is kind of like a murder mystery, like it's set in a hotel, and these three millionaires offer a prize to whoever survives the evening. It's kind of like a House on Haunted Hill premise, and it goes along like it's just a regular kind of mystery. But then like supernatural elements start getting introduced, and again, like most of Rebane's films, it kind of just turns into what the hell is happening? I don't think we have an answer. And the narrator at the end actually says, we don't know what happened. You're like, that's bullshit. And then Twister's Revenge is, again, shot in the town of Gleason, or not, shot in the town of Merrill, Wisconsin, where we saw the exhibit. But it is basically, it's Knight Rider if Kit was a giant monster truck. We have a sentient monster truck, and we have kind of like three dumb low life crooks who are trying to steal the computer so that they can ransom it and get lots of money. And so they kidnap the female inventor, who is the wife of the writer and driver of the monster truck. And the chase ensues, where it's like first they're trying to get the lady, and then the monster truck and his owner are trying to get the cops, or trying to get the crooks rather. The best thing I could say about it is that it's energetic, and it reminds me of some Ozploitation films in that there is shit blowing up like all the time, and you have monster trucks running over things, and you have a Sherman tank that is driving through stuff. And so it's like, wow, okay, I don't know how you convinced people, Bill Rebane, that it would be a good idea to let me drive my tank down the middle of your main street, but he apparently convinced the right people.
Probably didn't take a whole lot of convincing. I mean, Wisconsin, they're looking for any type of excitement. A tank rolling down the street sounds good to me. Get the camera, let's do it.
And the last thing I want to feature on this box set is the documentary called Who is Bill Rebane, which is a question a lot of people ask. And it's by David Cairns, who's a great kind of film historian. And I really like this documentary. I know you haven't seen it yet, and I think you really enjoy it because Cairns uses scenes from the film to kind of comment on, like he poses questions in his narration, and then he has the film characters answer those questions. And it feels very, energetic and fully realized there's a conversation going on between the audience and the artist. Like he's asking, why is this happening? And then you have the narrator from from The Game going, we don't know why it happens. And you're like, So he's having fun with it as he's appreciating it.
Well, that sounds good. That seems to be the way to approach that type of material for sure.
For sure. Cool. Any final comments you'd like to offer on Bill Rebane?
He is Wisconsin proud, so support that 100%. It's not like there's a whole long, laundry list of people from the state who can claim to be what he did. So more power to him.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, and thank you so much, Dave, for coming on the show. We're going to have you back again probably next month, talk about something else. Until then, keep exploring, keep searching, keep sharing the scare.